I moved into a new apartment less than a year ago. I worked through college, so I could move out of my parents' place soon after graduating. The place itself is nice. It's got a pool, hot tub, even a tiny attic for storage. It's a 10-minute drive from my work, and it's walking distance from the gym I go to. It's the perfect little setup for someone just starting their adult life, like me. I am not an outgoing person. When I lived in my parents' neighborhood, I knew none of the neighbors. I kept to myself, and I had every intention of continuing this habit. In fact, the only exception to this was the middle-aged lady who lived immediately next to me, Jane. Our yards have small fences, and we often greet each other when leaving or coming back home. But it's only ever a friendly hey. Besides that, I don't put my nose where it doesn't belong. I work very long shifts, and I get home very late, around midnight, sometimes later. My routine is to make dinner, shower, and go straight to bed, if my eyes can stay open for even that long. But on the very first day in the apartment, my precious sleep was interrupted. Crack, the unmistakable sound of a can opening. In my defense, it was nearly 3 a.m., and I was exhausted. It sounded close enough to see from my window. I checked and found that I was right. Before I explain any further, you'll need context as to the apartment complex I live in. It's a row of 2-story buildings, with units on both sides of each building. I live on the first row, right on the street. My bedroom is on the second story and is on the back of the building. My window overlooks the fence of the building behind me, giving me a perfect view of the ground floor unit's porch. There are plants and shrubs behind the fence, seemingly to provide some more privacy. But my view is above those two. Sitting on the porch was an old man with a Coors Light in one hand and a cigarette in the other. I wanted to shout at him. If he was going to indulge in his vices so early in the morning, he could at least do so with some consideration for others. Regardless, he stayed relatively quiet after this, and I was able to get some rest. The next night, I was woken up at an even more egregious hour by the sound of coughing. Coughing doesn't even feel like the right word for it. It was more like hacking. Violent, deep, guttural noises followed obscene hawking and spitting. Outraged, I went to my window and immediately located the sound. It was the old man again. He was standing, one hand on the back of a chair, the other over his mouth, doubled over and coughing with his whole being. My anger turned to pity and shame, hearing how he coughed. This man could very well have some type of disease or condition. And here I was selfishly condemning him. As I listened to him mumble to himself, I made a new resolve. I would break my chain of solitary living and introduce myself to my neighbor, even if it was only once. The next day, as I passed by Jane in our morning ritualistic greeting, I decided I would ask about the man. She told me his name is Leonard and that he had lived there a long time. She told me he lived a sad life, a widower forgotten by his children. This flushed out any semblance of doubt left in me. I would befriend this man whether he liked it or not as we spoke. I noticed a faint murmur of a voice coming from the open upstairs window of her unit, quiet, almost whispering. I assumed she must have had guests and kept the conversation short, not wanting to intrude. Admittedly, I was slightly nervous. I put together somewhat of a gift basket consisting of things I thought he may appreciate, mostly snacks from nearby stores. I waited for the weekend and, gifts in hand, marched over to his front door. He was very slow to answer. I stood waiting for almost 5 full minutes. Within those minutes, I heard strange noises. Thud, drag, moving somewhere on the upper floor. And wheezing too. Not like before, but like someone with holes in their lungs was trying their best to breathe. A painful pattern of inhales and exhales punctuated by a terrible squeaking from within someone's body. Just as I was about to leave the gifts on the ground and go home, the door swung open. The first thing that struck me was the smell. Death. It was so strong that my eyes watered. I had to stop myself from gagging to preserve any type of manners in front of my neighbor. He now stood before me, clad in a dirty, faded red t-shirt and stained, baggy, gray sweatpants. He looked like he hadn't showered in days. When he spoke, his breath was somehow able to overpower the smell of rot from his apartment. It was like curdled milk. He spoke gruffly, slurring his words. What? He took up most of the doorway, but I could see a portion of his living room. Flies buzzed incessantly over something behind his couch. His carpet was flecked with large brown stains. His TV must have been on somewhere out of sight. The sound of distant muttering fluttered like a ghost through the air. He noticed me staring. I know he did. I flashed him my best attempt at a smile, holding up my offering to him. "Hi, I'm Stan. I moved in not too long ago. I thought I'd introduce myself. These are for you." He plucked the basket from my hand and dug through it, tossing everything to the ground one by one, as if he was looking for something specific. When all but the pack of beer remained, he looked up and gave me an equally gruff, "Thanks." I was sure this time. He sounded drunk. He shut the door on me and most of the things I had purchased for him, which were now scattered on the faded brown welcome mat. I was shocked. I had overthought this so much that I had planned for every scenario. All but this one. My mission had been a complete failure. Honestly, I was relieved. I took it as fate telling me to stay in my lane and mind my own business, as I always had, something I was all too happy to do. But it also meant I was right back at square one. That Sunday night, I was again woken by the same ungodly hacking. I went to shut my window when something caught my eye. Something different. My neighbor wasn't doubled over like usual. There was no tension in his body. He was standing half hidden in the bushes by his fence, as if trying and failing to conceal himself. His mouth barely moved, yet the same violent, guttural coughing rattled from his throat, perfectly mimicking the sounds I had heard so many nights before. He was staring straight up at my window, staring into my eyes from his hiding spot. I don't know why this flooded me with panic. I felt like a rabbit who had just been spotted by a hawk. I ducked down immediately, and the coughing stopped in the same instant. When I peeked my head up again, the porch was vacant. I shut my window and checked the locks just in case. Paranoia, maybe, but it helped me sleep. The next week was peaceful, not a sound from my night owl neighbor. I started to think that he may be on a trip or something. I do have a habit of jinxing myself, because the very night I began to hope that my sleeping troubles were at an end, I was woken by another noise. Not the crack of a beer can, not coughing or wheezing, but popping. Sickly and wet. The sound sent chills through my body before I even saw their origin. I peeked through my blinds, careful not to make too much motion in case he was watching me again. If only. My neighbor was on the floor, laying on his back with glossy eyes. He was almost dead still. The only movement from him came when the man eating him ripped another chunk from out his thigh. Another pop. The sound of bone being ripped from sinew and socket. The figure looming over my neighbor had chewed enough off of him to pop his entire leg from his hip. He proceeded to gnaw at the meat like a carnival turkey leg. I gagged, a mistake I cursed myself for. As soon as I made a noise, the man looked up directly into my eyes, still hidden from behind my shutters. I understand I sound like a lunatic. I know that it's not something anyone would ever believe. But the man eating my neighbor was my neighbor. On the floor, he lay pale from blood loss, partially eaten, in a pool of black blood. And on top of him was the very same man, now smiling at me with chunks of his own flesh still wedged in between his yellow teeth. I almost instinctively grabbed my phone from the nightstand by my bed and dialed 911. Seemingly in response, he jumped over his porch fence with agility not befitting his age and sprinted towards my front door. I raced him down the stairs. I was confident I had locked the door, but I needed to be sure. I stopped in my tracks before I reached it. Jane had her face pressed against my sliding, glass back door. Like Leonard, her chest and hands were drenched in blood. She smiled at me the same way he did, and knocked almost politely on my door. I ran back upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom. The operator had already assured me that several officers were on the way, despite my incoherent rambling. But that did little to calm me. I wanted to vomit, to faint, to be anywhere but here. I keep a knife by my bed, which I retrieved and clung to as the banging on my front and back doors intensified. Then a hellish choir of coughing filled the air, coming from both sides of my home. It sounded like a recording of Leonard's cough, but as if it were coming from all around. It filled my ears until my vision spun. It was deafening. At last, I could hear sirens approaching, cutting through the cacophony of coughing. After a few more minutes, the police arrived at my door. I didn't open it for them, and I'm sure me holding a knife at them as they kicked my bedroom door down, did my reputation with the law no favors. They carted me off to the station, where I explained everything to them. They told me there was no one there. Jane and Leonard's apartments were empty, spotless, scrubbed clean, and no one was by my front or back doors. There was no evidence of anything happening, this or any night. More than that, aside from documentation, there was apparently no evidence in the 2 apartments that Jane or Leonard had ever lived there. It's been a few months since then. The apartments next to and across from me are, to my and the police's knowledge, vacant. My secluded lifestyle has only gotten more drastic. Nothing makes me feel better. That feeling of prey being stalked never leaves me. Every polite smile I get nearly sends me into a panic attack. I never know if it's real anymore. They all smile the same, too wide, too still, like they're waiting to be recognized. I'm suspicious of everyone. I know they're still out there, Jane and Leonard, and who knows how many others are like them. My online friends recommend therapy, but I refuse to trust some stranger. I barely trust my own friends anymore. Regardless, I try to do things to keep my mind off of it. Exercise, work, even some art classes at the community college. Anything to distract me. In fact, I only decided to post this because just now I heard a noise from my attic. It's around midnight now. It was faint, almost polite. Thud, drag, thud, drag.